What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Blind Power. Today's going to be a great day because we're going to talk about something that has been crossing my head in the past couple days. Basically, what trade secrets should iOS and Android trade? So TalkBack has some really cool features. I've been testing out, TalkBack on Android because I want to make more videos on Android. I make too many videos on voiceover and stuff, and I want to start leaning more to the Android voiceover. Android TalkBack, speech program. So I was basically testing out, looking at the documentation on different features in TalkBack, and I'm like, wait, I know voiceover like the back of my hand. TalkBack, I know most of it, but there's still some little corners that I need to stretch into to find out, because I basically just use the same two gestures, shake to read the whole screen, to read from top to bottom on Android, and on iOS, swipe up or down with two fingers to read what's on the contents of the screen, and sometimes I'll use rotors. But, I'm like, okay, how do I, there's certain things on Android where I'm like, this is missing, and then there's certain things on iOS where I'm like, I want this on iOS, and it's on Android. So, enough blabbering, let's get started. The first thing is, so on TalkBack, when you are adjusting a slider, one of those things that you get like when you're listening to music and you get a little slider with volume, and on voiceover it says, flick up or down to adjust the volume, and on TalkBack it says press the volume keys to adjust the volume, or to adjust the slider. It doesn't matter if it's volume, a slider in like a timer in an app, or a slider that has to do with speech rate. It doesn't matter. It'll say use the volume keys. That should be on iOS. That should be on voiceover. Why? Flicking up and down, it can get annoying and you can get finger ache. What if you have to go from 5% to 10%? You have to go with your finger like this. And it looks like your finger is freaking dancing because you got to go up the list like, 40 to 50 times just to get to 55%, or whatever the case may be. If you have to scroll a lot through one of the big sliders where you have to adjust a very minimal value from like 1 to 100 and you're at 5, you got to go to, and you want 55, you got to go 50 times with the finger. That's going to hurt, that's going to ache. Use the volume keys. That would be great if Apple implemented volume keys with voiceover, because of the fact that you just click until you get to what you want. Yeah, it's going to take a while, it's going to be annoying because you have to click the volume button 1,000 times, but I feel like it's more intuitive. I feel like it's definitely more, it makes it feel more polished, more of a rounded accessibility product. It makes it feel like they thought about, long, excruciating scrolling through a slider, right? So why not just go ahead and do that, Apple, please. Now the next thing that Android needs to take from Apple, so TalkBack has this swipe up and down with one finger for the rotor. See, the rotor has basic elements, links, text, tables, so on, same as voiceover, but it's one finger. And I feel like when you're swiping up, you can hit that rotor navigation by mistake, because what if you're swiping up with two fingers, which you do to use like the home button gestures, what if you're doing like this with two fingers, you're swiping up and one finger is slightly elevated and then the rotor kicks in, and then what? You can't swipe left or right to navigate. You're like, what's going on with my phone? Especially for noobs. Like if you just, no offense to people who just started, but like, what if you're learning and you swipe up with two fingers and one finger slightly elevated? The person who's teaching you how to use it, or even if you're teaching yourself, you're like, oh, or the person who's teaching you is like, wait, what is this? What's going on? Oh, it's a rotor. And then you got to tell your trainee, the person that you're training, you got to say, oh, yeah, it's a rotor. You'll learn about that in a few lessons. And then you have to turn off the rotor because the person slightly elevated one finger. Therefore, you access the rotor. Now, why don't you use the rotating gesture? Rotate two fingers, right? Use that. Like, iOS has that, and it's intuitive as can be because of the fact that, you know, you don't accidentally trigger it. You know, it's such a, I guess, was the word convoluted? Like, complicated? I don't know, man. It's complicated, but it's not. Like, you just rotate two fingers. How are you going to do that accidentally? It's impossible. So therefore, you eliminate the chance of accessing the rotor by mistake. Android, take a note from Apple. The next thing is zoom. And this is another one that Android needs to take a note from Apple. First off, the gestures. Triple tapping with one finger is easily triggered when tapping in an app. Say, you know, you're tapping buttons and you do it 3 times too quick, zoom pops up. And then what if you do it too slow? Then you open a button. And then you press a button because you press 3 times too slow. It happens to me every day. I'm like, click, 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 and it should be click, click, click. But you know, at 4 in the morning, your brain's not that fast, right? Like I wake up early every day because I'm about to graduate and I'm, you know, doing a computer science engineering career. I wake up at 4 in the morning, and when I wake up my phone and I go to use Zoom, I press a button by mistake. I've called people by mistake because I triple tapped a little too slow. Yeah, kind of embarrassing, right? You know, so, you know, why doesn't Android take a note from Apple and use the double tap with 3 fingers? And that makes it so good. And double tap and swipe up or down, you know, double tap and hold up or down to zoom in, zoom out, instead of using the pinching gesture. The pinching gesture basically interferes with the web browser. If in a web browser, since you can pinch, there's 2 pinch gestures listening at the same time. It's the zoom gesture and the web browser gesture. Therefore, you're causing issues with, you know, it's called, in the tech world, it's called crosstalk. So like basically 2 gestures are interfering, 2 gestures, like the one gesture interferes with 2 things. So therefore, by, you know, using the Apple's gesture, double tap with 3 fingers and then hold and swipe up or down with 3 fingers, that avoids this gesture interference. So therefore, that would be great. Now, I know you're saying, well, you've done 2 of Android straight in a row. Now, what about Apple? Well, here we go. I just wanted to stay on topic with Zoom before I switched. So, with VoiceOver, the voices are awesome. They are incredible. You know, the standard, I think it's the Samantha voice, the standard one. Basically, you know, she sounds superhuman, and the Alex voice even breathes. That voice is incredible. The dude, when you put like reading something, you can hear him breathe. How? What? Why would it breathe? Anyway, it's a great, you know, screen reader. It's a great, you know, voice that goes with VoiceOver, and VoiceOver has a ton of voices. Android, take note from Apple. You know, it doesn't have to be all these exactly, you know, I'll talk about like the things that could be debated at the end of the video, but basically, you know, Android, that voice sounds from 2010. That voice sounds from back in the day when iPhone was new. The voice is the same, like you could compare this voice to the voice from iPhone 2010 and you could say they're right on par. You compare the new VoiceOver voices with the new TalkBack voices, still, VoiceOver voices are miles ahead. Like, literally, Android voices are, I mean, they've gotten better. They've compressed it. Yes, it's gotten a little bit better. But it's not to the point where I could say the voice is good. Like, there's this weird comparison. Take a listen.
Silicon Lottery deleting WebView. 23%, 100%. Year out of office March 25th through April 13th. Orders placed will still ship, but deleting will not be available during this time. Edit box, search all products. Search all, search. Button. Home. Link in list, not products. Link. Silicon Lottery deleting and bidding. Graphic outed list.
Okay, did you hear that? Yeah. That's exactly why I always, you know, criticize TalkBack for the voices. That voice is just awful. It needs to be redesigned. Now, the next thing that I kind of feel like Android, Android's talkback is great. You know, the magnification is great, but I feel like there's so many differences in accessibility. There's so many gaps, and why does the blind and visually impaired usually prefer iPhone? Because it's intuitive, okay? It's so intuitive that you basically just feel like it's more rounded up. It's more well done. It's taken more time. Android, I feel like accessibility is there, but it's kind of like this afterthought most of the time. Like, I'm a developer. I'm a computer programmer. I do.
It's a mobile operating system developed by Google.
What? Who said that? Okay, whatever. I don't know who said that. Okay. Anyway, so basically, since accessibility is an afterthought, since I'm a developer, I talk to, different developers on Twitter. I listen to podcasts, and podcasts for Android and iOS, there's one big difference. Apple has community guidelines for accessibility. You have to, Xcode. If you don't know what that is, let me explain. It's where the apps for iPhone are done. iPhone, iPad, iPod Touch, Mac, Apple TV. All the Apple platform uses Xcode as, a means for developers to make apps, right? Xcode has baked in, internally, Apple started using Xcode since before the iPhone era. And they've thought in accessibility, so therefore, for developers, you have accessibility inspector tools so that you can tell if your app is accessible. Android, there is something like that, but it's so bare bones, and it's not like if you leave something blank, if you leave an image, it won't even say image. It'll just not read it. It'll skip over it. iOS, you can actually label the image. You can set image descriptions. You can use, the Core ML, which is the engine that Apple uses to detect faces, and when you use the camera app, you see it firsthand. That is open to developers. There's lots of accessibility things open for developers to use in iOS and the Apple side of things. Android, they're there, but I feel like there's no guidelines for accessibility. They're not as good as Apple's. I feel like we need to kind of nag Google to say, hey, ask your developers to be a little more accessible. And I honestly, I feel like as a developer, I feel like, it takes more time, but it's doable. Now, there's certain apps that, for example, right now I'm working on the accessibility update for my apps. And I feel like, doing this, I feel like, wow, it's incredible how intuitive making apps accessible is, because you can set descriptions for images on iOS. On Android, you can do the same thing. So I feel like on Google's part, they just have to, ask developers more, hey, make this more accessible. And also with Google, when you submit apps, you basically don't get any kind of middleman saying, fix this, this is ugly, voiceover user, or a talkback user won't be able to see this. This is completely, you're an app that is going to be opened by some people with accessibility, and it'll crash. Say if it crashes with talkback, they're just, it's going to be there, and it's going to be nobody's going to say something about it unless we, the blind and visually impaired community, say something. Now with voiceover, if the app crashes with the accessibility inspector that Apple internally uses, they're going to come back to you and they're going to say, your app is crashing with accessibility. Therefore, you have to go back and fix it. There are certain guidelines Apple goes through that Google should fix theirs to have as well. Google's guidelines are way too basic and bare bones. That is one of the principles of why accessibility is not a thing. It's a thing, but it's not as polished as it is on iOS. Now, another thing that I feel like there should be, this is a message for both Android and iOS, okay? This is something that they should take in consideration from the blind community to iOS and Android, to Apple and Google, because I've been criticizing what one should adopt from another, but now I'm going to say what I think they both should adopt to make our lives easier. So with Zoom, there is input lag. Basically, when you press a button, there's about a couple milliseconds in delay. So it's about 2 to 3 times the delay. So say if, without Zoom, it's about 9 milliseconds. What about, when you're using Zoom, what the delay is about 27. I'm guesstimating the milliseconds. I'm not exactly sure. But basically, even if it's 4 milliseconds, but say 4. If it's 4 milliseconds without Zoom, with Zoom it's going to be 12 milliseconds. It may not be as noticeable, but if you're playing a game and you forget to turn Zoom off, you will notice it. So Apple and Google, please take note. So that's what Apple and Google should take from accessibility from each other, and my suggestion at the end for the input lag issue with Zoom. Not many people think about it because of the fact that, usually you're like, okay, I'm going to play a game, I got to turn Zoom off because it's going to, conflict with my game. But if, with iOS, it doesn't happen unless you're doing like a multi-touch game. But for most games, you don't need to turn Zoom off. However, you still receive the input lag. It's not as bad as it is, sometimes where, you can tell the input lag, but it's there, and it's an input lag that I feel that we can fix. The Android and iOS developers, me being a developer for both platforms, I feel like, we as developers have to take the responsibility to, fix these input lag issues, design our apps to work with accessibility, even if it's a game, find a way to make it accessible, and not just for the blind and visually impaired community, but also for other, accessibility communities as well. The thing is, I don't know much about other communities, so I can't speak for the other communities. I can only speak for the blind and visually impaired community and what our needs are as accessibility users. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Comment, rate, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. Hit the subscribe button and remember to enable the notification bell to get all notifications of Blind Power uploads. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.